So today we're going to talk about a rescue story, but we're not talking about rescuing a person, we're talking about rescuing a text. We're going to look at how a really unique lens, the lens of the Latter-day Saint Restoration, gives us a radically different way to understand one of the most important books ever written, the Old Testament.
Okay, let's just start with a really provocative question. What if the book that we all think we know, the one filled with stories about floods and prophets and ancient laws, what if it's actually trying to tell us about a worldview that we've almost completely lost, a meaning that's been hiding in plain sight for hundreds and hundreds of years?
And this isn't just some dry theological debate. We're not just splitting hairs here. This is really a story of discovery. We're going to trace the recovery of an ancient Hebraic way of seeing the world, a mindset that, from this perspective, got buried under centuries of Greek philosophical tradition.
So at the very heart of the story, you've got this epic clash of ideas. It's a tale of two worlds clashing, two completely different ways of thinking about God, reality, and, well, everything. And this clash is what ended up shaping the entire course of Western religion. And here's where you can see the core difference. On one hand, you have traditional Christianity, which was deeply, deeply influenced by Greek philosophy. It valued abstract ideas, things that are static, unchanging, perfect, a real focus on just being. But the Hebrew mindset you find in the Old Testament, it's a whole different ballgame. It's all about action. It's concrete. It's dynamic. The focus is on doing. God isn't some abstract principle. He's rolling up his sleeves and getting involved in history. And this whole transformation, it actually has a name: Hellenization. In Restoration thought, this is the pivotal moment that basically threw a veil over the Bible's original meaning. Some even call it a metaphysical apostasy. I mean, think about that. The very idea of who God is got fundamentally changed. The passionate, involved God of Abraham was sort of reimagined to fit this Greek ideal of a perfect, distant, philosophical being. Now, this difference in thinking, it starts at the most basic level you can possibly imagine. It really gets down to the nitty-gritty. What is the universe actually made of? How did it all get here in the first place? So the standard answer you'll find in a lot of Christianity is this idea called creatio ex nihilo. It's the doctrine that God, because he's all-powerful, created everything, the entire universe, out of absolute total nothingness. So before creation, there was just nothing. But the Restoration lens offers a totally different model, creatio ex materia. See, in this view, that Hebrew verb for create, bara, it doesn't mean to just conjure something out of non-being. It's more like to shape, to cut, to organize. God is the master builder, the ultimate organizer, who brings order to matter that was already there, eternal, pre-existing, but chaotic. And you can see this idea spelled out really clearly in Restoration scripture. This quote says that God's organized and formed the heavens and the earth. It's not about making something from nothing. No, it's describing a council of divine beings who are shaping and structuring the raw materials of the universe, turning chaos into a home. And here's where it gets really personal. This idea doesn't just apply to planets and stars, it applies to us. In this worldview, not only is matter eternal, but so is the core identity of every single human being, what's called an uncreated intelligence. And that, right there, completely reframes the whole purpose of life. Suddenly, it's not just about passing a test, it's more like a divine education for beings who have, in some essential way, always existed. Okay, so let's follow that train of thought. If matter isn't some flawed, temporary thing to be escaped from, but is the eternal stuff of reality, well, what does that say about God himself? This perspective leads to a very, very different kind of deity than you might be used to. The God that was kind of inherited from Greek philosophy is often defined by what he isn't. He's immaterial, meaning he doesn't have a body. He's invisible, so you can't see him. And he's impassible, which is a fancy way of saying he's without emotion. Because for the Greeks, having emotions meant you could change. And if you can change, you can't be perfect. But then, Restoration scripture just drops this bombshell of a counter-image. The prophet Enoch actually sees God weeping over his children. Enoch is so shocked, he asks this question, "How can you weep? You're perfect and holy." And the answer reveals a God whose perfection isn't found in being emotionally detached, but in having infinite empathy, a weeping God who feels right along with us. This also completely changes how you read that famous line from Genesis, "Let us make man in our image." In this framework, that's not God using the royal we like a king. It's seen as a literal reference to a divine council, with God the Father presiding over other divine beings. And what's fascinating is that many modern scholars of the ancient Near East say this view is actually really consistent with the original context of the Bible.
So you've got all these huge, profound ideas about God, humanity, and creation. How did they get expressed in the real world for ancient Israel? The answer is through architecture and ritual. The ancient temple becomes the physical, tangible embodiment of this entire worldview.
The scholar Hugh Nibley, he just nailed it with his foundational concept. The temple isn't just a building for worship. It's a map of reality. It's like a blueprint of the cosmos. And the rituals inside are like a script that reenacts the entire drama of creation. So the layout of the temple itself becomes this symbolic journey. You'd start in the outer courtyard, which represented our fallen world. Then you'd move into the holy place, which represented a step up, a higher order. And finally, the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, which symbolized returning right back into the very presence of God. It was a ritual journey back home.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. When you actually put on this restoration lens, how does it change the way the Old Testament reads? How does it actually rescue what was supposedly lost?
So when you put all these pieces on the table, eternal matter, an embodied God who can weep, and uncreated humanity, what you get is a profoundly, radically different theological world. It challenges some of the most basic assumptions many people have about creation, about our own identity, and about what this is all for.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core differences. On one side, you have creation from nothing and an immaterial God, but on the other, you have creation from eternal matter and an embodied, weeping Father. This is the shift from a Greek to a Hebraic framework, laid out right in front of us. It's a fundamental change in perspective on just about everything.
So when you get right down to it, the whole point of this restoration is to kind of rescue the Bible from what it sees as these historical and philosophical cages it's been put in. Through this lens, the Old Testament stops being just a relic or a prequel to a later story. It becomes the foundational text for an eternal plan, a plan that's all about embodiment, about family, and about the incredible potential for human beings to progress forever.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. If God isn't a static, immaterial, abstract being, but is instead an embodied, progressing, glorified parent, what does that imply about the ultimate potential of his children? What might that change about how you see yourself?